Can you hear that f***ing shit going?
Sounds like a vacuum cleaner.
It's like, this is supposed to be a f***ing recording studio. And I get this shit, and I'm paying what? Hello and welcome to Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast, our weekly podcast where two friends who met in the tech industry have a chat about big topics every week and try and untangle them and get their theories across. My name's Michael Forrest.
And I'm Ivanka Magic.
And this week, guess what we're talking about? Talking about people.
People.
Which I just love as a title. You know, people. You gotta have faith in people, but also people just... Some of the stuff they do, it's unbelievable.
It is.
The way they vote, things they think,
Probably, yeah.
things they say, do, expect, you know. So we're just going to talk about people in general.
Are we? I've been sort of compiling a bit of a list of people.
Ivanka's just written a list of people. I was just like, people. Generalisations about people.
I've been taking names.
Okay, fine. So I'm going to rant about people. Apparently Ivanka's written a list of people to talk about. So this is going to be a very inconsistent podcast.
We're going to talk about two different things, not listen to each other.
First, it's been a couple of weeks.
It has.
What have you got to report?
Last Friday was the first Friday where you were doing something, not me.
Because
I was like, what do I do? I'm at home.
I don't do stuff.
And I've got 2 hours that I normally wouldn't have. What can I do? I was quite lost, I was.
And what did you do?
All sorts.
Did you?
I did actually. I will tell you my story actually.
Okay, fine.
I've been doing gyrotonic.
Yeah.
I've been doing gyrotonic with a man called Laurie Booth, who lives here in Brighton. And he's a dancer and choreographer. I've been talking to him about his dance and movement philosophy. And we've been capturing notes. So I tidied up all our notes and took them over to him. And so we've got the foundation of a book. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
There you go. That's what I did.
Look at that.
That is a constructive use of your time, I think you'll find, Michael Forrest.
Well, any thoughts on space since anything you wish you'd said?
Don't know. I did listen back to the episodes and thought they were quite good, actually.
My speed of light thing, what I was trying to get across is that going faster than the speed of light is going back in time. That's the crux of it.
See, that's why it's just it messes my head.
That's why you can't do it, because otherwise you'd be going against cause and effect.
It.
And if you could go back in time, then all sorts of possibilities open up, don't they?
True. One of my rules as a parent that I've set myself is to try and not pass my fears, my sort of more irrational fears and foibles onto my child. That's one of my things I'm trying to do. And I was delighted the other day when she did tell me that she would like to be an astronaut so that she could go into space, she said with her eyes like that. Sometimes she wants to be a superhero and sometimes she wants to, be a dinosaur. So these aren't very... But the point I'm trying to make is that I have not put her off the idea of being an astronaut.
So you didn't immediately burst into tears?
I didn't go, oh my God, you can't go into space, I will never see you again. I didn't
Be
do
more
that.
afraid. Okay, well, good. I've got quite a lot, but I was going to try and mix it in with the main content since a lot of it is about people.
Oh, that's what prompted it? Did people annoy you last week when you? Is that where it came from?
Well, no, it was interesting. So I went on the march.
Oh yes, you did.
I made my first placard. I was trying to think of something good to put on. I decided to do it about an hour before we had to leave, and then I sort of got myself into a bit of a tangle trying to think what to write, and including me just kind of lying on the floor going, I take it, and Sharon going, you've really been a drama queen about this. And I was just like, I just need to think. I've just got to lie here and think of something. One side I came up with Brexit solves nothing. Like this idea that it's actually going to improve anything whatsoever. I thought I kind of wanted that to kind of go, look, this doesn't, I know that you voted for Brexit because you wanted things to change, but Brexit itself is not the answer to any of the problems that anyone is having. So I thought that was quite a good one. And then the other one I put that I was trying to... This was my first attempt, was people with no power cannot be to blame. To sort of try and fight this thing of, oh, it's immigrants, oh, it's people on the NHS. So it's like, well, it's not them, you can't blame them. But then I kind of started backtracking on that. Firstly, because I was thinking, oh, well, they're going to be like, oh, well, it's the big wigs in Brussels that are making all the decisions now. That's why we need our sovereignty back. So I was like, okay, well, that probably doesn't... And also Sharon was like, it's a bit humorless, this placard, isn't it? So
yeah, it is.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
far.
So for side two, I came up. I thought, let's just be, after a little bit of a lie on the floor and a temper tantrum, I came up with cookie warnings, not borders. I admit is a thinker, but I think it's an honest thing. You know, coming from my industry, you know, they make us put bloody cookie warnings on websites which solve nothing really, and are a pain in the arse. But I will take that over, you know, not being in the EU any day of the week. One person kind of walked past and went, hey, good one! But like...
Out of 700,000.
I saw a lot of kind of old people squinting at it, trying to make sense of it. Like, what's happening here? I don't understand. I didn't have time to like mock up a little cookie warning with accept or anything. So that was my placard. So Sharon and I turned up at the march. She put on her EU flag as a cape. And we got in there, marched.
Very good. My mother complained that there was too much standing around and not walking.
Right. Yeah,
not so much of a march as a shuffle.
Yeah, well, that's, it's the
That's
idea,
good, though.
I suppose.
Good sign.
I want to start talking about people. Well, maybe I'll just kind of go in with one of my stories that I think was one of the first things that sort of set me off on this. And it was like, well, the first one was just more of a general kind of Brexit voter, like leave voter person. We were walking through Leicester Square, walked past some pub on the corner, and we heard, traitors!
Yeah, I got that. I told you. Yeah.
And that's not my flag! And I just waved the Brexit solved nothing sign at them, and we sort of like walked off, which is fine. Like, I can understand those. Like, okay, fine. Like, but I had something to sort of go, look, hopefully maybe they'll read that and maybe they'll think, I don't know, maybe it'll appear in their dream one day.
I got the traitor thing, and when I was doing leafleting before the referendum, you get these people going, not likely. You're like... Yeah, I don't really know how to engage with you.
I saw them sort of like picking up a traffic cone to throw or something. I was like, let's just keep moving. I wasn't going to get into a conversation with them. They were like, they'd been drinking and. But then we kind of got up to Soho, and I was like, I kind of want to walk this sign through Soho where there will maybe some more inclusive people. And kind of like got stopped. Like this guy in the Star and Seven, whatever, he wanted to see the sign. When we were sort of like off duty by then, I had the sign down. I wasn't like waving. I didn't have it sort of over my shoulder anymore. But he was like, oh, what's that? I was like, lifted it up to show him, and he was like, cookie warnings. And then when he got it, and then he started sort of going, oh, well, you got it. And he started, I could feel like he was about to tell me that I needed to simplify the message or something like that. And kind of, I was like, on one hand, I was going to be a bit defensive because I'd had my temper tantrum earlier, trying to think of anything good to write on a placard, and on the other level just kind of being like, I don't care if we're going to be, the audience of this is we're walking through a crowd and like people are going to see it for ages, so they'll have time to figure it out or not. I don't really care as long as people see the Brexit solves nothing side as well, which I think is pretty unambiguous and pretty straightforward, but also kind of like cuts off a lot of reasoning that I think is suspect. But then this other guy came at me from this pub, like a young person. I mean, you could smell the cocaine coming out of his face. It was sort of like he sort of took my sign off me to sort of hold it, and he was going to start explaining to me, and it was like, we're the people that you need to, and I was sort of like, no, and I just wasn't buying into his premise at all. I was like, no, I think he was kind of like gearing up to tell me how it was my fault that Brexit had happened because I was being too fucking liberal intelligentsia or something, and I was sort of like, I'm not listening to this. And as I sort of smelled him kind of like coming at me with that stuff, I sort of turned it around to go, look, this is the simple side. So, but then he was just like, he wouldn't fucking let it go, but he wouldn't listen. He'd made some sort of snap decisions about what I needed explained to me, knowing nothing about me. And it was sort of pretty offensive, but there was a bit of alcohol and definitely some coke involved. So I thought, well, okay, if he really does want to talk about it, I'll give him like a podcast card. And I was just like, look, here's my podcast. Let's like, you email me like once you kind of know a bit more about where I'm coming from. And then we sort of turned to walk off and it was like, whoa, it was like, what are you doing giving me a podcast, trying to make me listen to your... And like deeply offended that I would impose any of my opinions on him when all he was doing was like coming at me with opinions and not listening. I was like, what the actual... Like threw the card on the floor. And like I just kind of picked it up and went, flipping heck. And like Sharon managed to diffuse him by kind of like getting him to admit that he wished he'd gone on the march and hadn't, kind of thing. He was like, and then he kind of went, It's like this people think they just want to tell you what you're doing wrong. As soon as you put yourself on the line, as soon as you start doing something, and I felt that then, like in real time, but you feel it with, like, I think any artist that anyone knows about, people that don't do anything fucking sit there. They just want to tell you what you're doing wrong. Even though, like, in this case, there's nothing stopping you making your own sign that's better than mine and coming on the march instead of being in the pub all morning. I don't understand this attitude people have where they think, like, from a position of doing nothing, that they have any sort of say in what the people that are trying to do something are doing.
I don't know if you've ever read that, The Man in the Arena. It's by an American president, I think. The Man in the Arena. It's a poem and it's well worth a read. When I left my last project at Brighton and Hove Council, I read it to them in my leaving presentation, because whenever you're doing something like that, you're absolutely right. And it's not just artists. It's doing a project that might be pushing the boundaries. It's introducing any kind of change or progress. You're constantly under attack. And even the people that wish you well will constantly be criticising what you're doing. And the Man in the Arena, I edited it to make it gender non-specific, but I was like, you are the person in the arena, you're the people on the outside, you're the one sweating and crying and bleeding, and the people on the outside, they have no right to criticise you, because even if you fail, you have done more than not trying. And I think for me, that is such an important part of my life. I can't do nothing. And so, it's very difficult. And I mean, I didn't understand from your second story if the guy was he'd voted Leave or Remain.
No, he claimed to be a Remainer. Obviously, I mean, this was Soho. This was like central. Yeah. He wasn't pro-Brexit or anything, but he was just he just wanted to fucking explain to me to my face when I didn't ask for it, and wouldn't listen to anything I had to say. Just tell me who I am and what I'm doing and how I'm doing it all wrong, without even a second of context. He didn't even turn the sign over. He's just looked at the one side, got maybe upset that he didn't immediately understand it and took that as some sort of personal affront, and suddenly I'm responsible for this. It's flipping heck, I'm not talking to you.
I have to say though, as a woman person, that happens to me all the time. That is the absolute definition of mansplaining. It's
excellent.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to find out anything about you. I'm going to make a snap judgment on your expertise, your education, your context, your everything. And I am going to tell you what I think. And that is exactly what's happened to me, basically, for years. And it starts as simple examples of it, like in the lab at uni, and I asked some guy how to do something. How do you do that? And he just sat in front of my computer and did it for me. I'm like, well, cheers. Fuck off. And so there is that kind of, it's not just that men do it to women, absolutely not. But it is something I experience often. But it's also something I phoned up a friend the other day, and she started telling me what to think, and I was like, Sorry, I can't hear you very well. Lines breaking. I know. Fuck, I haven't phoned you just for you to tell me what I think. Thanks. It's like I do find it quite frustrating, and I try to, and I'm sure I do it too. And I try so hard to check myself.
It's a horrible feeling when you realise you've done that, isn't it? Like when you've kind of gone, oh, sorry, like I completely misjudged that. Like,
yeah.
Maybe I'm doing it all the time and just not realising it as well. I don't know. And actually, like, that's definitely gives me empathy for the feminist cause, like how angry that made me and how long I was thinking about it afterwards. Like, if that's happening like every day, it's like, Jesus, fuck men.
One of the things I try really hard, because I've got a number of young, like I've mentioned before, like my cousins are all older than me, so their children are kind of grown-up children, but still much younger than me. And I have these conversations I try so hard to be like, not sort of do that, you're wrong because you're young and you don't know, which I think is, as bad as you don't know because you're a girl, you don't know because you're this. And I try going, like, why do you think this and why do you? But then sometimes I'm like you've got to think. Please think. Please think. Please don't assume that you're right all the time.
Or ask, find out.
Yeah. I mean, one of them posted something on Facebook the other day that was so obviously bullshit. On a scale of, turmeric cures cancer and rub some coconut oil. It was about it's quite a horrible article. I've mentioned before the levels of Catholicism in the former Yugoslav countries, like in Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, particularly Herzegovina. So there's quite this strong pro-life or anti-choice element. Right. And one of them shared this article that said that sort of aborted fetuses were being used to flavour food. Okay. And I was like,
amazing.
Because it's not face to face. I don't want her to feel stupid. I don't want her to feel attacked. I don't want anything. I want to approach her position respectfully. But I'm like, I can't. And many times I just let it go and then maybe wait till I see them and then talk to them about different things. But in this one, I just went to Snopes and just went, and then I sent her a link to but I did it on a private message, not responding to her original thing. And I was like, look, just so you know, that thing you shared is untrue. And here's how untrue it is. You are a very clever person. Don't do stupid things. I sort of like, I said, we clever people have a responsibility to be clever, not to be idiots. Right. And she was like, I didn't over-reg it. I literally just went, clever people should behave cleverly. Read this before you share stuff. Because, come on, that's unbelievable.
I've heard something like that. We went to John Ronson the other day and see him in the Leicester Square Theatre, and I think he might have said something about this fetuses in food thing. Basically, I don't think it was the same. But Jesus.
Well, it's basically how often these things, there is a grain of fact that it gets built on. In medicine and so they often use a cell from a particular person or a cell from a thing and do testing on the cell. As a way, I mean, I don't know the ins and outs, so I'm not a biologist or a biochemist, but they, so a cell from some kidney tissue that was from an aborted fetus or something, it's been used for testing something to do with food, but that's not that those cells are in food. It's that in the same, like if you want people to not test on bunny rabbits and mice, they've got to test on something that we're gonna know if it's gonna poison a human or whatever. Anyway, it's one of those things where a misunderstanding of science leads to it's a deliberate misunderstanding of science. I don't understand it, but I have enough faith in society, even as it is, to assume that no one's going to be feeding me human remains. I think that's pretty fucking illegal. I think.
Oh, God. And also just, it doesn't seem practical from a
It
business
does not,
perspective.
No, really. It's like, I don't want to lie, you know, I don't, it's, and it's very, very hard when you're, because belittling is one of the worst things that you can do to somebody. It's like, it's like, I'm going to laugh at your idea is just an arsehole thing to do. But then sometimes you're like, well, I just don't know how to talk to you. And I think in this instance, I thought quite hard before I did say anything, and I carefully worded things. But it's like, I don't want to make her feel like she needs to defend herself. I just want to sort of do hey, did you know these sorts of websites exist where you can check things? But yeah, and also,
yeah, well, that's it. But the subtext of that one is like, there are so many abortions happening every day that there's enough that they're having to get rid of them somehow.
Yeah,
it's
well,
like, Jesus, get some
think,
perspective.
You know, on the I suppose this episode gives us like free rein to talk about it. But it's a good choice, Michael. But one of the things that I ended up then talking to her sister about was the fact that what I'm always surprised about with her sort of, you know, this anti-choice thing she's been doing has been bubbling for a few years, and I just don't see her, and I still I think it's a conversation that I'd rather have with her in person. But I'm like, I never see her share something like, you know, donate money to starving children in Yemen. You know, can we please dedicate some effort to looking after children that are alive? And why doesn't looking after children that are alive go hand in hand with these sort of anti-choice philosophies? It's like, if you care so much about life, please vote and you know, act to preserve it. That's the thing that
Do you think it's misogyny then? Do you think it's just like a, you know?
I personally think the anti-choice agenda is so much more to do with control and power and nothing to do with preservation of life whatsoever. Because the people that extol things like that never ever are doing things like worrying about refugee caravans travelling across, you know, Central America.
I know in the general case. Sorry, I know in the
in
general case it's
case?
misogyny. I mean, in this particular person, do you think she's kind of internalising some misogynistic thinking, or is it?
Yeah. Definitely.
I mean, it's Catholicism, I suppose. That is, with everything that entails. It's like, can you see the misogyny for the trees? You know. I
don't really know how to address it, because there's other things that she shared that have been to do with feminism, and you know, how women. This is the thing. I can't possibly take it on in a Facebook feed. It's just not the appropriate forum.
Why don't you give us one of your people?
One of my people. I'm going to introduce you to Greta Thunberg, or I hope it's pronounced Thunberg. She deserves to have her name pronounced correctly. She's 15. She's Swedish, and she's a powerhouse of environmental activism. She's been on strike, not going to school. I think she doesn't go to school every Friday, but she's basically becoming the voice and the face of the next generations. You know, you're sending us to school to teach us the science that tells us that the climate is in a catastrophic crisis, and you're not changing your politics. So she's calling for a change to the politics and the way politics works to make the climate crisis, give it the focus that it deserves. So I can share some lovely links to her if anybody will make you feel guilty about how little you do, Greta Thunberg will.
Great.
But if we can't
Cool.
all be Greta, then we should definitely help Greta wherever we can.
Well, we should tell her how she's doing it wrong.
We could tell her, we go, listen, Greta, first you've got to go to school, and then when you grow up and you're a big girl and you've got a degree and you know all the then she's like, there's 12 years.
Once you've found a husband, then...
But I look at, I mean, those kind people like Greta, who I'm not going to like...
Inspirational
she's
people.
She's massively inspirational, and she's younger than me by a long shot. I could easily be her mother without having to have been a teenage pregnant lady. And
I do want to just, not to diminish anything, but I am going to take any opportunity to fight against this fetishization of how young anyone is in particular, because I think there's a lot, not maybe fetishization is a bad word, but there's a lot of like, and they're only 50, and they're only 30. I don't want that to necessarily have to be part of the conversation. I just think, because that just makes you kind of feel...
Well, if that helps.
Yeah, okay. No, but it's like...
I think in this instant, what makes her impressive is the level of personal sacrifice.
Right.
She's like, and I think that's one of the things that I admire and I can't do. Do you know what I am not sure that I would ever have been the person that saved 500 Jewish children in the Second World War and then walked with them into the concentration camp. Do you know what I mean? I'm like,
what's made her who she is then? Because often, like, especially when it's someone young, you'll find that there's quite an impressive parent as well. So, like, it doesn't often happen in isolation.
I have thought about her parents, and I admire them for letting her follow her conviction and not go to school, do your homework, you can go on climate strike after school, or you can do that on a Saturday. Their allowing is possibly, they potentially don't even use those words. In the things I follow her on Twitter now, I've seen her around for a few months. She's not like come out of nowhere. She's been that obviously in my bubble of Twitter and Facebook, I get a lot of climatey stuff. She doesn't have nearly enough followers on Twitter considering what she's doing. So go follow her, everybody.
Just follow her.
Make her, give her some support.
I set up a stall at a conference called Tech Day last week. I decided instead of just sort of like flogging a product that I've got my happiness app, that's why they got me down there, but I haven't really touched it for a while, and it's kind of doing what it needs to do, and I wasn't really that into the idea of just kind of going there and pitching my product. So I was trying to think what to do, and I had to talk to you about this as well. And but I came up with the idea of one of my problems recently has been, what am I going to... I kind of want a 5-year project I just want to stick all my eggs in one basket and just really kind of push for something like a meaningful social impact company or some product, whatever it is, kind of coming off the back of this podcast as well. So I decided to make it a sort of like brainstorm hack day type thing. I thought, well, maybe I'll bring my computer and sort of do some tapping away and maybe sort of try and put something together, but kind of set up a big post-it note board and just invite people to tell me what they think of the ideas that I've got and what they're worried about and what their ideas are. So I'm also trying not to slip into my direct spiel that I was giving to people, because I spoke to a lot of people, and it was a very interesting day, and it was sort of very unique for me to just be dealing directly with the public, even admittedly like a slightly rarefied kind of tech industry interested public, but one by one having these 5, 10, 15-minute conversations with each person where a lot of the time I'd have to kind of like break through the business. So we do this product and we do services and we do web apps and mobile and blockchain, and a lot of them would come in like that, and then I'd be like, okay, that's fine, and I'd sort of like, okay, that's really interesting what you're doing there. What this is about is, what about the meaning though? What about this stuff? Why are we doing all these jobs? Why are we working on this stuff? Why do we need to make this money? Like, what is at stake here? Really, once you sort of step back, what keeps you up at night? Like, and actually sort of like breaking through to people's kind of like inner lives a bit more, and like finding out what they were worried about. So I had the UN Sustainable Development Goals up. I kind of printed them on my banner, but I picked out, mainly because of the podcast, I picked out, here was what I was saying. Like, so I've got some apps that are to do with good health and well-being. So I've sort of got a couple of those. So I'll put that up because that's something I've been doing. And then like from this podcast, now I was introducing, saying, look, I've been doing this podcast for a year and now I'm really trying to find something. Like, we've been talking about it and I'm like, okay, I'm really trying to look for something to really kind of sink my teeth into. And so I put up climate change and gender equality on there, with the caveat that I had absolutely no ideas about gender equality, but I just knew it was important. Some people just kind of wanted to write something on a Post-it note and stick it up. Some people just, as the board grew, they would sort of want to +1 this or that. But what I learned was that I just came out of it with so many ideas, and just realising that everyone has a different kind of anxiety about something different. So from stuff around taxation and government and saving the bees, education, ageing population, particularly in Japan. Like, I spoke to someone from Japan, someone from Uganda talking about Rwanda and like how they need startup help, but they're the first country to refuse foreign aid. Now you have to sort of invest properly, I think was what she was saying.
Okay.
One person's idea was like, just merge all consciousness.
It's only a little idea.
Yeah, but stuff about empathy. And like, so one idea I did have from the conversations was, what if we could fix internet comments? I mean, imagine how many mental health issues are caused by the rotten nature of internet comments. And just kind of coming to that conclusion that people write this horrible, trolly stuff because they can't see the other person's face reacting. And the only way to get any sort of response, which involves the other person taking to the comment box to start writing a reply, is to write something so inflammatory that it gets a reaction. So my little idea was that, well, what if there was a little face in the comments box that started reacting to the content of what you were typing? So like just kind of growing shock as you got more and more racist. But yeah, ideas like that. And then like stuff about consumption, recycling, human connection, self-care. Even one person said, well, can we talk more about what is right in the world? Some people are concerned about, buying a house and the tenants' rights and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. Deforestation, that kind of thing. Like, what happens to recycling? And then stuff about the NHS, doctors. The thing is, every idea that I did have, when I'd explain it, like my league table for the super rich, or my comments box, or my post-political state, or my VR and AI and education, and for like VR for old people. I don't know, like any idea that I did pitch, I would always get like this really positive reaction to. Like, I would always get like, once kind of they got it, I would so I was like, well, I didn't really manage to filter out any ideas, because anything I said, like, well, I could do this. First, usually in response to what they were kind of the direction they were going, they're like, oh yeah, that'd be really good. I'm like, okay, right. So I still don't know which one though.
Just to add to this, because then we'll get slight side story to come back to you to help expect. But I've started I've started work this week for the Wellcome Trust, which is very interesting. So I'm doing some work, some user research for them. But the details of that we'll possibly tell you about later. But what I was able to do is on Tuesday go and see a lunchtime talk at the Wellcome Trust with a woman called Dr. Diane Finegood, which I thought was a fine name, so I remembered it. It's like Finegood. Anyway, she was talking about complicated not being the same as complex. And so she talked about there's three different things. There's simple, there's complicated, and there's complex. So it goes, making a cake is simple. Putting a rocket into space is complicated. Raising a child is complex. Right. That's her distinction. And one of the things she was talking about, because she works more in the sphere arena of public health, and that's really her position. But she was talking about the fact that and I learned some more language, because they talk about basic science and they talk about other science. Basic science being actual
Physics,
lab tests where you take a cell and do a thing. And then there's more complex research. And she also talked about grey literature, which is, I think, all the stuff the non-academics write. It's like, grey literature. Anyway, I think that was the implied definition to me. But anyway, what she was talking about is all these problems that we have now in public health, the obesity epidemic, loneliness, all these things. They are really complex issues. And what the complexity of them, so it's like when trying to choose an app to do, like if you pick a thing, it's really hard to pick a thing because the minute you pick a thing, you're ignoring this whole area of the complexity. And also you don't know that as soon as you change one thing, you might be fixing the wrong thing if you don't understand. Because it's all, I was about to say it's complicated. No,
it's complex.
The world is has a large number of complex problems at the moment, which I think is making it very hard to pick. And it made me feel, as I was watching this talk, I was thinking, like how I was saying at the beginning, it's very, like to be Greta Thunberg, you have to decide, you have to be able to decide that climate is the issue that you care about most deeply. That quote I told you about, the suffragette, her daughter said, the biggest strength my mother had was her absolute conviction that women had the right to vote. And you have to have this 100% conviction in this one line. And I really struggle with that because whenever I look at anything, I'm like, but.
We've talked about that it's the death of the old, it's a death, it's a process of, swallowing death, swallowing change, swallowing limiting of possibilities. And I just remember talking about this last year when I was talking about the cover art for my album. I'd been thinking about this for so long that when I finally just finished it, it was like such an emotional moment because suddenly all those other possibilities were just gone. And it was just this one bloody thing, like this one square of images, and that's all it is now. It goes from being an infinite potential to being like this bullshit thing that now exists in the world that no one cares about. Great. So it's sort of it's tempting to stay in this sort of like, I'm going to decide, or maybe I'll try and do something that does everything. That's not going to happen. Like you got to, and it's almost like why I didn't want to pursue physics as well, because you just have to pick one tiny little thing and spend your life on it. And then maybe it'll become part of something. I don't know. And I think that's a difference now to, say, Einstein's time or Newton's time when there was a lot more up for grabs. That was bigger. And now it's all about your niche, and I just struggle with that because it's like, So that the other interesting thing on that topic of Einstein's time, my participants in my user research are doctor researchers, highly specialised people, and one of them was saying that a lot of things that they're currently looking at in medicine, people discovered in the 1800s. It's just that now we can explain it in more granular detail, and we have better experiments and better, so for example, somebody in the 1850s might have understood that this part of the brain, if it's damaged, has some effect on your appetite. Because basically they went in and poked a rabbit's brain, and do you know what I mean? That it was very crude. And then now he's basically in a situation where he and his team are working on proving that it's this neuron and this one rather than that area of the brain. So it's kind of, there's much more detail. Yeah. Or similarly, like sort of in terms of genetics and is it Mendel that knew about natural selection and had experiments around that, but didn't know what the engine of it was. And it was Watson and Crick the next century that discovered the DNA and was like, okay, well, this is how it works. And that was still a pretty big one. The contrast of these one talk and one sort of user research interview is this guy's like sitting there really pinpointing and making sure that we know exactly the problem, but he also was talking about the fact that really, we're not going to cure the obesity epidemic by finding which specific gene does a thing, because the reasons people are suffering is far more complex than biology. And I was listening to this talk that this woman was giving, and I've been doing some reading around it. My impression, so the kind of user research I do is from a scientific point of view,
incredibly slapdash. You know, you wouldn't write an academic paper and say, well, this is how you're going to cure a thing based on the kind of user research that I do or the depth of it. But what I often call the kind of user research I do, design research, because it has a very specific output. The reason we do it is not out of curiosity, but because we want to make a thing.
Yeah.
And we want to make the right thing. We want to make sure it works for the people that need to use it. So it's like this sort of like looking at some of the recommendations they're making around medical research or scientific research. It's like there are a few bits that they could learn from design research in terms of shaping their outputs to make them more actionable and more understood in there. So it's quite, I mean, I've had a really interesting thinky week because I've had so much new stuff going to my head.
I've been quite enjoying the Guardian guilty feminists from the last couple.
Yeah. And I did have her on my list, Deborah France, just for an extra bit of... because, you know, we don't support the Guilty Feminist podcast enough.
No, we don't mention it enough.
So I did think Deborah Frances-White deserved a shout out for her ability to combine an absolute desire to be a performing comedian.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about great people, shall we?
Some
more great people on Ivanka's list. Or just certainly inspirational people.
Yeah, people that you want to put...
Deborah's doing pretty well.
Deborah's doing very well.
I very much enjoyed how she put her finger on the notion of including a climate change denier for balance.
Yes.
Which was a line in a song I wrote back like a couple of years ago, but I sort of like false equivalency masquerading as balance. So I kind of got into a bit of a rabbit hole with that, though, because I was thinking, well, you can put someone that thinks that Dr. Ford was lying about being raped. You can have a scientist that is a climate change denier if you have 99 scientists on the panel that aren't. Yeah. But you can't make it half of the panel. The only problem with that reasoning is that by the same token, you could exclude like minorities and people that don't get heard. But she was saying like history is there for balance. So that helps you decide, should I put someone, a transgender person on this panel for balance? Yes, because they're not often heard. Whereas should you put a climate change denier? I don't know, maybe they're not, maybe you think they're not heard enough.
No, I was talking to this again with one of my relatives about sort of like you, and the example I'd use was when we had that conversation about whether or not to include a flat earther in a for balance. No, this is wrong. There is no balance. This is factually... So it's even like a slightly different to what Deborah Frances-White describes with the for balance, with the in the context of rape. And climate change, I think, falls into a category of there is a right and a wrong answer. And... You know, it's like, I mean, this one cousin of mine, she studies like theological philosophy or something like that. Like it's all very, there's a lot of Catholicness in it. And there's a few priests at her university and they're like, don't let anyone tell you that the church thinks that the earth is flat. It's like, this is, we are not, that is not the world that we live in. And so it's that sort of like, there are some people that are wrong and they do not need to be on a panel. But
I think when you say you're putting someone on for balance, what you actually mean is you're putting someone on for entertainment. You want conflict and entertainment. That's why you're doing it. You don't care about balance in the least. And this is one of the things that makes me most angry about the way the media has been behaving in the last few years, and is really what I think is behind Brexit and Trump, like really seriously. Like they put Trump on the telly constantly.
Yeah.
They put
'Cause
Nigel
he's funny.
Farage on the telly constantly. Yeah, because he's entertaining.
Yeah.
Don't call it balanced. Don't pretend you're reporting the news when you do that. You're just doing it because it's entertaining. You never commented on my Guilty Feminist dodgy dubstep remix. Maybe you never heard it.
No.
I think you probably listened to the draft and never listened to the episode, so you missed it.
Possibly.
I did a whole little Guilty
you?
Feminist dubstep remix.
On what episode was that?
It's like a couple ago. I guess I'll try and find it for you. Or maybe I'll just throw it here.
Yeah, do it. I was talking to a friend on Monday and he was going, so-and-so's auntie, she's got a terrible habit of going, well, we used to be able to call it the what's it shop rather than and he's like, yeah, we did. And now we know that was wrong. And it's not political correctness gone mad. It's wrong.
I had a literal person at Tech Day. I had a literal middle-aged man come up to me and go, what should we do? Shoot Trump. And I was like, okay, well, and then what? But then he was like, all these millennials now, they're just always complaining, all snowflakes, aren't they? And I was like, oh, what do you mean by that? Yeah, they're upset about stuff. Maybe part of that is because we are leaving them a world that is in climate disaster and they can't get jobs and we've made a big mess for them. So maybe they have a little bit of right. Yeah, well, you can't say anything these days anymore, can you? There's a woman at work, you can't even say that's a nice jumper anymore, or you go into a tribunal. I was like, you can say that someone is wearing a nice jumper, you just can't do it with a leer in a predatory way. In the end, I argued very carefully each point as he kind of reeled off the stuff that everyone says. It's quite strange to be faced with someone like that in the flesh and have to kind of go, look, what you're doing here is you're scapegoating the people with the least power, and that's something we have to stop doing. And I will fight you to the death on this subject. All you're doing is furthering a historical marginalisation of people that can't stand up for themselves instead of looking to who is actually causing the problems, which was fun, but
It's difficult.
And I saw someone from LBI, in fact, had posted up this thing about this smug guy with glasses talking about in front of an audience about all the problems with millennials and how they've been coddled too much by their parents. There have been mistakes in their raising, and now they all expect to be able to walk into a job and they don't realise that their mum can't phone in and fix it for them. And just the absolute talking down so much. And then all these shots of the audience going, yeah, millennials. The older generation realises that you can't just be overtly racist against people, but they'll still sort of be racist about the French or Americans. They'll kind of still be doing it, but in a sort of but they're white, so it's okay to say it. But it's sort of it just kind of moves the goalpost. And now it's like millennials is this kind of casual, millennial snowflakes all complaining all the time and think entitlement. Maybe they're frustrated after 8 months being in a job that doesn't seem to have any meaning is because it doesn't have any meaning, right? Not because they're entitled snowflakes. And they're just maybe know a bit more than you knew at their age because of the internet. Not that's necessarily reading, but you know what I mean? I think to kind of level this, millennials being a scapegoat for anything is pretty offensive, just as anything else. Women can't say anything these days.
Yeah. I can't remember if I told you the story of bumping into my mum's neighbour. He's in his 80s. I can't actually remember all the stories he told me, but there was plenty of, I think women should be able to drive a car. I mean, and if they can drive a car, then they can vote, can't they?
Good logic.
Nice one, Bob. But he was, there were moments, I think there's a certain point where there's no point explaining it, I think
I was kind of, that's why I sort of wanted to do a little video where I kind of responded to each of this smug gits comments about millennials and just kind of put it out there and just maybe the same people will see it. But in terms of millennials, I had you telling me about your mentoring experience fresh in my mind, so I was going, well, that's just a grotesque generalisation, isn't it? There's a lot of motivated people.
hadn't got her on my list, but the actual organizer of that Think Nation thing, Lizzie Hodgson, she's somebody that's got some dedication, power behind. She's just like a force propelling the Think Nation idea forward, which is very impressive too.
It's funny how my brain is going this way more and more. Like the thing about kind of calling out individual people, since this is about people and not about one person, it's like we do have this thing where we want to get one person and raise them up and kind of sanctify them. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but what I really like about Mark Maron's podcast is he always gets the context around these successful people's lives, and he finds out that they had a particularly privileged upbringing this way, or they had supportive parents this way. Once in a while they'll have had parents that didn't want them to do what they were doing, but they managed it despite them. But I think no one does anything alone, and I know I personally fall into the trap of thinking I've got to do something alone, and no one, even the most Gandhi, is a product of something. And I think it's worth asking the question of how did Lizzie Hodgson get to be the person that is confident enough to try and do something like this? I would quite like to understand that, even if it's just to make an excuse for why I haven't done it. Or just, I don't know, I sort of want to humanise people that are just amazingly impressive all the time. I want to humanise Albert Einstein. I want to humanise Newton, because otherwise I'm just like, well, I can't do anything then. And I know it sounds like I just want to kind of take people down. That's not necessarily, it's just like it's just narcissism at the end of the day. I just want to feel like I'm not quite as shit as all that.
And I think that's true of, this is what I was saying earlier about, I don't think I would ever be that person. But we don't all need to be that person, number one. Number two, if there's anything in it, all the things we've been talking about, it's about sort of how complex it all is. How somebody becomes that person is a conversation that I had yesterday that came out of me thinking about that talk I saw on Tuesday, was the fact that what makes solving world problems so difficult is, like the number one part of the complexity comes from the fact that we are, each of us, completely unique. We are completely unique in our DNA, our set of friends, our family, the food we ate, the road we walked down. Everything that's made me the person I am today in this moment is unique to me. And so finding solutions that are going to work for a mass, even to the things like the way I make lifestyle changes to be, climate friendly, or trying to be like an activist in my own life, the way I can make those choices or have made those choices. I want to encourage other people to do them, but to impose on somebody the idea that they would behave the same as me, or even to be, I really admire Lizzie Hodgson and what she's done, and I really admire Greta Thunberg and all these other people, but they're not me. Part of me may be, why can't I be more like them? And then I think, well, I can't be like them, I'm not them, but how can I help them? Be even, if they're willing to put themselves out there like that, what can I do to help them be even better or even bigger?
Well, that's because whereas I'm like, I want to be thought about in those terms as well as doing a million other things, which, I haven't done anything towards that. So, but no, certainly in terms of everyone's unique, I mean, if that was definitely hammered home by my Tech Day experience of just realising like there's no patterns here. And the more people I talk to, the more variety I get. And it's like, okay, well, I guess this does have to come from me, from my experiences, from what I am driven by and can do something.
But I think the pattern is that everyone's worried. That's the pattern.
If you probe them.
Well, if you go far enough away, like everyone's worried, but their articulation of their worry is slightly different. It's like depending on what what's bothering me today, and
their background, what they've seen,
what they're seeing, what they know about. I do think that some things that help us feel like we're moving forward, in however small the steps, regardless of what area it's in, would be beneficial to everybody. all these like social media platforms as well, they're all centered around the projection of what you've done and they're not really about what you added to anything. They're just how well you present it. It's a showing off platform, not a doing things together platform.
This is something I was just thinking this morning about the EU. I suppose they haven't invested that heavily in communicating everything they're doing to the public at large. So all the public knows about is bendy bananas and, 3 things. Whereas, but like it would obviously add a massive overhead if the EU also had to make massive marketing campaigns explaining all the benefits that they were providing the communities that voted to leave. It's a separate thing to the actual work, but like now we're discovering, well, maybe they should have put a little bit more effort into communicating what they were doing. But then then you see the bill for that and people whinge about that, but at least they'll know that it was for a reason. It's tricky. It's like people, if you can't see what's been done, then you don't know. I
think somebody in all the tech world of campaigning pro-Europe has actually built a what has Europe done for me website or something, or app or something. That's an aside, that's not really an answer to your point. And then separately, there's also this thing, I think, that why do I need to know everything? Like, what happened to a bit of trust? Like on the one hand, yes, question your government, argue in these structures and query them and hold them to account. But then on the other hand, it's like, I don't have capacity to worry about whether everybody is doing their job properly. I've been thinking about this in the context of this kind of experts thing, where people are perfectly willing to go to doctors. They've got cancer, they want to go and see a cancer doctor, but an article comes out published by scientists that says, you've got 12 years, it's not even an article, a report that says we've got 12 years to avoid catastrophe. And everyone goes, oh yeah, but next week they'll be saying something else, won't they? And the minister, that woman minister, the fracking minister, I'm going to call her because I can't remember her name, was on telly, and I don't have the news on telly very often, but the day that came out, she was there going, they were saying, it advises people to eat less meat. She said, we're not a nanny state. We're not going to be telling people that they can't have steak and chips for dinner if they want it. Like, no, actually, you should be. That is your job. Your job is to preserve the planet. And leave it up to them to decide whether to ignore you. But I've been thinking about that in terms of the 5 a day thing. It's like, it's not your job to water it down. It's your job to state it in those uncertain terms, because people are perfectly capable of disavowing the stuff you tell them. What about the smoking? Like, people still smoke, even though you tell them that it's going to kill them whenever they pick up the packet. Like, it's not your job to water down the message, and that is very irresponsible. The woman on Tuesday, this Dr. Finegood, she said part of the problem as well is the way they communicate outputs of scientific studies. So it's like 1 week coffee's bad for you, next week coffee's not bad for you, and it's just like kind of that irresponsible, lazy, she didn't use these words at all, but that sort of like that sort of reporting on science that undermines the science. Because, actually, if you do a study around coffee with one population with a certain set of factors that you haven't considered the complexity of them sufficiently, and you get one set of findings, and you're going to do the same study somewhere else with this factor that you don't understand yet because you haven't understood the complexity, you get a different answer. And both answers are right, but maybe not for the reasons that people think they are. Anyway, maybe these journalists should say what the consensus is, rather than here's one report that says the opposite. It's like you need to kind of like put it in context of the wider field of knowledge, rather than just going, this is the new thing and the old stuff is wrong now. Like, because that's never the case. Because undermining science is not helping us at all. It's madness. So I had to come to this for whatever life history reasons, this realization myself of that trust at a certain point has to be a decision. When you know a certain amount, you just have to decide. Because when you look at it in absolute terms, there is no amount of evidence that can prove to you that someone else is trustworthy, that someone else will never make a mistake, will never be wrong. But for the entire of human history, that's just been, it's sort of like happened naturally, and it hasn't been like the mainstream, that evidence that tells you that
people might not be right, people in power might be wrong. The transparency has never been there to this level that people have evidence that goes against anything you care to say. It's possible to find some evidence that kind of says the opposite. So if people don't realise that trust doesn't just, you can't expect it in this day and age to come to you always on an emotional internal level, and sometimes you've actually got to consciously weigh the facts, balance it and go, okay, well, this person did make a mistake, but in general I think they know what they're doing. Because we think trust is this sort of absolute thing, and if someone makes one mistake, they're kind of although that's we're kind of coming past that, and Trump, people are sort of reacting to that sort of thing as well, and you get Trump. It's I think if people kind of understood that sometimes it has to be a decision, and it's not something that's just going to happen automatically anymore because of the sort of information density of our experience. It's a technological thing. I think it's an information age thing. Rob Ryan's this artist that does these sort of very intricate paper cut things, but I bought some of his tape. He's got this tape, and it's this green tape. I used it to tape up my banner, and it says, "Believe in people." It says, "Listen to the world, believe in people." And I've always had faith in people, even though maybe emotionally that's hard. I've always thought, no, I kind of always wanted to give people the benefit of the doubt and have faith in them. And it really was this Brexit situation that made me go, oh God, can I have faith in people? Right? And I would really like to have that faith in people again and find it again, rather than the alternative, which is to kind of just embrace this us versus them mentality that's really coming from the other side, if that's not an oxymoron. How can we get back that faith in humanity, that faith in people that inside, even though they're, I don't know, is it patronising to say everyone's confused? Probably, but frankly, there's too much to deal with, and it is probably a bit too much, but can we maintain faith that people will ultimately do the right thing? Maybe it's just that a lot of the bad things people are doing and thinking is because they're not faced with somebody that they can empathise with, and if we can kind of increase how much empathy people experience, those human instincts will kind of take over again.
I love people. People do such wonderful things for each other, and we should spend more time. One of your ideas on your post-it notes is right. We should spend more time talking about lots of the good things that people do. I had quite a good conversation yesterday with my young cousin, and she and I were talking about, what makes me look at a homeless person and think, how do I help this person? And somebody else look at the homeless person and go, can we move this homeless person, please? And the common thread has got to be empathy. And I think anything we can do to increase empathy for other humans is got to be a plus.
Because we've got to get everyone on the same team again.
Yeah, everyone's got to understand that it's only when we're all well that we're all well.
It just gave me a little head rush. We've got to get everyone back on the same team. How do we get people on the same team again?
We're team humans on planet Earth.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening.
If you like the podcast, go to grandpodcast.com and have a poke around, listen to some more episodes, or just subscribe in your app. Where can people find you, Ivanka?
People can find me at Ivanka on Twitter.
They can find me at michaelforestmusic.com, and all the music on this I made. And what if people want to? Could they do to help?
What you could do to help is you could subscribe friends, write some reviews. Reviews are very helpful. Share links on your Facebooks and your Twitters, and write to people. Say hi, how are you? And then say, have you listened to this amazing podcast? And include a link. Get in touch with people you haven't seen for a while.
Have conversations with, open up the conversations, open up that meaning conversation, and then you'll probably end up thinking of something, and you'll be, someone on this podcast was saying this, and then that might get them. That was something I did Tech Day. It was when do I... Sharon was like, you're pushing the podcast. I was like, well, but it did tend to come up one way or another, and then I generally kind of got people to take a card, and I was like, well, on the podcast we talk about this, and we talk about this the first time. But yeah, just finding the right way to put it. It was naturally coming into the conversation because this stuff is important to me, and I was setting the conversation, so I was able to do it. But don't maybe do it to someone coked out of his mind in a pub who's trying to tell you what you're doing wrong and how it's your fault. Brexit's your fault.
Yeah.
Or at least until he's come down a bit and you can kind of have a human conversation. Includes empathy. Okay, and you can email us hello@grandpodcast.com.
Yeah, that's always a good idea. Because we actually read those emails because we get so few.
we hardly get any emails. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much for listening.
And see you next time.
Bye. Bye.